Hello there everyone. This video is a video tutorial on creating an expense tracking application. One of those applications that you can enter your expenses maybe throughout the day or throughout the week, and it helps you keep track of these expenses. Now we're going to be using Blazor WebAssembly for our front end, and we'll be using Web API for our back end. We'll be using Entity Framework Core and SQL Server Express as our database. I hope this video will be informative to you. But before we start the video, this is actually a blog post accompanying this video. You could read through it if that's what you prefer. It has everything that is in the video, so you can watch the video together with the blog post or just watch the video, but it has all the code in here. If maybe we want to cross-check something, a file, like maybe this file, I want to cross-check the code at this particular time, you can also check it over here. I would also have the GitHub link accompanying this tutorial also in the description of this video. So we can now move straight into the video. Thank you. The first thing we need to do is to create a new project. And to do that, we first have to open Visual Studio. So I could just go out here and search Visual Studio. It's right here, so I'll open it. Okay, so it opens this window, and we'll go ahead and click on Create New Project. Then we'll search for Blazor WebAssembly. Blazor WebAssembly app, and this is it right here. The only thing we need to make sure of is that this is for C#, because as you can see, we have other options. This is also for C#, but this is empty. This is not the one we want to choose. We actually want to choose this one, which is for C#, not the one for F#. So let's go ahead and click on this and click next. And we want to go ahead and name our projects and solution. So we'll name both our project and solution Blazor Expense Tracker. I want to change this location right here, so I'll go ahead and do that. So so right now we have our project named Blazor Expense Tracker. This is our location and this is our solution name. We can go ahead and click next. Then over here we're going to make sure that .NET 6.0 long-term support is selected, and the authentication type should be none, and we also have to make sure this configure for HTTPS is selected, and also there's a ASP.NET Core hosted is also selected. Okay, this will make sure that we have our 3 projects when our solution is created. So we can go ahead and click create. Yes, when that opens, as you can see right here, we have this window. Let me just expand it. That's great. Now we can go ahead and close these 2 default windows that are opened, and over here we're going to open our Solution Explorer. Now if your Solution Explorer is not here, you can come to Windows and you can see it over here, Manage Windows Layouts, and you can sort of get your Solution Explorer to show up. Okay, so, or is it View? Let's see, View. Okay, yeah, I think it's View. Okay, so when you just go to View, you can see Solution Explorer here. You can just click it and it will show up over there. The other window types that you can have here, like Git Changes, Git Repository, Team Explorer, etc. So if you click one of them, they will open up over here and you can click them and have a look at what is in here. So if you have a look at this, we have our 3 projects created. That's a client project, and a server project, and then a shared project. So the next thing we'll be doing is adding a NuGet package called Swagger, which is going to help us be able to interact with our API when we create it. We want to be able to see all the different API endpoints, test them, and also document them. So we would have to install the NuGet package Swagger. So to install the NuGet package Swagger, we'll right click on the server project, go to manage NuGet packages. We'll make sure that browse is selected. Take a little while. And over here we can search for Swagger. Click enter. And we're going to be selecting Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core. So this one right here, Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core by swashbuckle.asp.NET Core, which has 279 million downloads at this moment in the version 6.5.0. So we can click on that and go ahead and click install. We're going to accept and just wait for it to install. It's installed now. The only thing that we need to be careful of is this version number. Since we are creating this in .NET 6, we should make sure that this first number over here is 6. That means it's a 6 version for Swashbuckle, so that it works perfectly well with the .NET version that we're using. So we can go ahead and close that since Swagger is installed, and move on to the next step, which will be to add and configure the Swagger middleware. Now we'll do that in program.cs right here in our server project. So we can double click on that. That's going to open the program.cs. Then we can go ahead and add our middleware. First we have to add a Swagger generator, and we'll add it right below here. We're going to add builder dot services dot add Swagger gen. We're going to add option, and then we go ahead and add option dot swagger doc. We are going to put in here v1 for version 1, comma, new open API info, the title is going to be equal to let's say Blazor expense tracker API, comma, we can also add the version here again, version equal v1, add a semicolon here, and then below here too we add a semicolon. That's the Swagger generator. Now finally, in Finally, over here under the request pipeline, we are going to just below this where we check if the app environment is development. Below here, we go ahead and add and enable the middleware. So we type app.use Swagger. Okay, and then below that we have app.use Swagger UI. That's perfect. So we can go ahead and save that. Then next thing we need to do is to run the application. So we can just come here and click here, start without debugging, because clicking this one will also run the application, but it will have to set up the debugging. So we just click this and run the application. Okay, so while we wait, after the application is done, we expect to see the application will run and we'll see the default app. But then when we go to, okay, it says there are some build errors. No, I would not like to run the last successful build. Let me see what the error is. So it says the type of namespace name, open API info could not be found. Are you missing a using directory? Okay, so I think I'm missing a using directory. So I can click, sorry, a using directive. So I can click control dot on this, and then yep, it suggests the using directive over here. So I need to add using microsoft.openai.models. Okay, so we can go ahead and click save and run the application again. It should build and work now. Yes, it's working. And yep, so we have our window open here with our application, default application that was created for us. Yes, this is it. This is the name of our app, Blazor expense tracker, the other stuff that are provided by default. Now if we want to check if Swagger is working, we can just add /swagger to our URL /index.html. Then we can click enter. Yes, and Swagger opens, so Swagger is working. You can see our API documentation over here, and this is the default API endpoint that has been provided for us. If we click here, we can just have a look at it. We can even try it out by clicking the try it out button, this try it out button. Then we click execute, and it's going to give us a list of temperatures that have been stored by default in the application. So that's great. Now we can go ahead and close this, and also close this command line, and that means that our Swagger is properly installed and it's working well. Next thing we're going to do is add our first model. We're going to do that in our shared project. So we can right click on the shared project. We're going to first add a new folder. We're going to name the folder models. And in the models folder, we would like to right click again and then add a class. We're going to name the class expense model. Okay, so right here, expense model. Click enter, and it's going to create a class for us. Take a few moments. Okay, it's done. So the first thing we'll do is change this class modifier from internal to public. Then we'll go ahead and add a few properties to this model or to this class. So we can just use the shortcut prop, P-O-R-P, hit tab twice. So we have int. The first property is going to be ID. We can move on to the next one. Next property is going to be a decimal property, which is going to have the name amount, which we're going to use to store the different amounts for each expense. Now we can go ahead and add a default value for this 0 or semicolon. Then we can add another property. This one is going to be a date time property. We're going to call it created at. Yes, that's great. We can save that. Next thing we need to do is add our database. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is add a connection string that will be added in app settings.json. So we can double click on app settings.json and we'll add our connection string right here. So we're going to name the item in the JSON file connection strings, because so that maybe later if we want to add another database, you can add a different connection string, and that will help us maybe use two different databases or whatever. So the item itself is going to be called connection string. Now inside the connection string, we're going to add a default connection. Okay, default connection, and that's what we are going to use as our database connection string in our application for the purposes of this tutorial. So when it comes to the string itself, we have server is equal to localhost. So what you need to know is that this string is different from database to database, but this is the actual string for SQL Express. So we have local server equals server, not serve. Server equals localhost / SQL Express semicolon database. We're going to name the database Blazor expense tracker. We just name the database Blazor expense tracker, and then the final part is we add this trusted connection. Trusted connection equal true. So that'll make sure that that's trusted and will work when we try to connect to that. So let me just check it, cross check it. Connection strings, default connection server equal localhost / SQL Express, database name is Blazor expense tracker, and trusted connection true. Okay, so we can go ahead and save that. And next thing we're going to do is, since we'll be using EF core to do our code first migrations and to push our changes in code to SQL in our database, we need to first install EF core, entity framework core. So to do that, we'll do it in the server project once again. It's a couple of NuGet packages that we'll be using. So we right click, then we go to manage NuGet packages. Then we search entity framework call. And as I said earlier, we'll be picking out 4 different packages. So the first one will be Microsoft.entity framework core, just Microsoft.entity framework core, this one right here, which at the time of recording has 601 million downloads. So we go ahead and click on it, and over here we will click install. But before we click install, we need to make sure that we are not selecting a higher version than our .NET version, because this version is 7.0.2. we need something that is 6 point something. So you can go ahead and install 6.0.13, and then we hit install. It's going to ask us to accept. We'll do that, and we wait for it to install. Okay, it's installed. The next one we'll be installing is this design one, Microsoft Entity Framework Core.design. We can go ahead, also select an appropriate version, and then click install, click accept, and wait for it to install. Okay. Yep, and the next one is this SQL Server one to make this entity framework core work for a specific SQL Server database. We do the same thing here. We select 6.0.13, then we install, click accept, and then the final one, no, let's wait for it to install first. Okay, it's installed, and the final one we are going to be installing is tools, and it's Microsoft Entity Framework Core Tools. So we click on that, we change the version to 6.0.13, and then we click install, click accept, wait for it to install. After it's installed, we can go ahead and close this window. Maybe, okay, let's leave the other windows open. Now the next thing we need to also do is create a DB context, which will be used to access our database. So we'll click on Solution Explorer. Then we'll right click on our server project, and then we'll go ahead and add a folder. That folder, add new folder. We're going to call that folder data. Then in that folder, we are going to create a class. So add a class named data context. Data context. Okay. So we're going to create data context.cs for us. Now we want data context to inherit from DB context, which is part of the entity framework code. So we'll need a using statement. So I can just click control dot to give me the option for the using statement using Microsoft.entity framework core. So we'll go ahead and add that using Microsoft.entity framework core, and that error goes away. Now the next thing we want to do is actually register the data context we just created in program.cs. So open program.cs, and just like we added the Swagger, you can go ahead and register the data context here as well. So builder dot services dot add db context. The name of the db context we are adding is data context, and we add some options. Okay, for these options we're going to add options dot use SQL server builder dot configuration dot get connection string. We're going to get the connection string from our app settings. We have to use the name of our particular connection string, which is default connection. Go ahead and add our semicolon over here and our other semicolon over here. We need to add some using directives here. I think let's save it and see. Okay, okay, no problem. There's no error showing, so well, let's just try to build this. So I can click Control B to try and build the application. Yes, I have 2 errors, so yeah, I need to get the using statement. So Control dot, I can add the using statement, which is just showing where my data context is saved, which is in this Blazor expense tracker.server.data folder. And then over here, okay, I made a mistake here. Use SQL server. Okay, so you can go with control dot, then we have to use an entity framework call. So add the entity framework call using statement. Then go ahead and save that. Now, okay, so that's it for registering data context. The next thing we need to do is add some seed data so that when we perform our migration, there'll be some data in our database that we can have a look at and see if everything is working. So to add our seed data, we need to go to the data context that we created, and over here we'll first add our controller. So the shortcut I used was CTOR. Let me do it again. You can just type CTOR and double click tab, and it gives you this right here. So what you can now do is add a parameter db context options. Then we add a data context. Then we name that options. Okay, then base options. Okay, move these 2 curly braces over here. So we're done with the constructor. Then below we need to add an override for a method in db context. So it's going to be protected interesting. Protected, yes. Override void on model creating model builder, or model creating model builder. You can name it model builder. Nice suggestions. Then we can go ahead and add our curly braces. Then in here, let's add the first seed data, or the first expense that I want to add to our database. So to do that, we need to add a model builder that we added as a parameter, model builder dot entity in the model expense expense model. Brackets, then we add has data. Can also add more parentheses or brackets. Then in here, let's just clean this up a little bit. Okay, so yep. So in these brackets, we can add a new expense model. And then we can just go ahead and add the ID. Add ID. Okay, let me just expense model. Okay, so we need to add the using statement for this. So right here, we'll add that removes the error over there. And now we can go ahead and add ID equal 1, then amount equal, let's say 10.0 m, 10.0, sorry, 10.0 m. That's for representing decimals. You can do it like this. Then we have created that. We can just use datetime datetime dot now. Okay, UTC now. Okay, so that's our first expense. That's our first expense that we add into our application. So I'll just go down here to my other screen and add 2 more expenses. Control C. So the first thing is we need a comma over here. Yes, then we have our other expenses added here. See some error here. I think I need to add a semicolon over here. And yes, so these are our 3 models. You can go ahead and click save, but before I finally go, I need to add a DB set right at the bottom. So right here before the last bracket or under in our DB context, we're going to add the DB set. So public DB set expense model, call it expenses, then add the get and set. Okay, so it's going to name the model's expenses in our application. Am I doing something wrong? What really matter? Okay, it's supposed to. Okay, so this is actually all the way in the namespace, which is wrong. It's supposed to be in the class. Okay, so let's put it right here. Yes, then we have no errors and we can save. Now the next thing we want to do is add our migrations. To add our migrations, we need to come over here to Package Manager Console and click on it, and it opens the Package Manager Console where we'll be entering our commands to first create our migration and to create our database. Now if you notice that you don't have Package Manager Console over here, what you could do is come up here to the menu here and click on Tools, and you would have it over here. at NuGet Package Manager and Package Manager console. When you click on it, it will open up in this window below here. So now, most of the time, you realize that this command line is not open at the server application. First of all, you need to make sure that your default project is server over here. But you notice that if we type ls to list the different directories in the directories where the command prompt currently is, we'll see that we have Blazor Expense Tracker and Blazor Expense Tracker Solution. Now we want to get into the folder, the server folder. So first of all, we'll change directory, which is cd for change directory. Then we'll go to Blazor Expense Tracker. So like this right here, cd change directory Blazor Expense Tracker slash server. So it's going to take us straight into the server directory. I can click ls, type ls again, enter, and then we realize that now we are in the server directory with all these different files and stuff. So the next command that we'll actually be using is add migration, and we're going to call the migration initial seed data. Okay, so we click enter and it will start building and create the migration for us. So the migration just basically creates the from our code, will create the SQL code that we need. Okay, so we notice that there's a warning here, but we'll deal with it later. So it's done building and it worked. So this is our the stuff that migration is doing. You see, it creates a table, and the name of the table is expenses. It has a column with type integer, and all this other stuff. A primary key, you have expenses, and insert some data into it. That's the seed data we have. So if you check, you see that it's the same values we have for our three data that we added to our application and everything else. So that's great. So the next command we'll be using is update database, which if we don't have a database, it will create a database, but if we already have a database, it will update the database. So we can just click enter for that to run. We will wait for it to build and also do its thing. Okay, so we don't have any red errors, so it means that worked. Now, the next thing we're going to do is check if that worked. So we'll just go to our search here and search SSMS for Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. Now, as I said earlier, you need to have Microsoft SQL Server installed. You can just Google that to see how to install it, or maybe I'd have a link in my description to a tutorial that'll show you how to do that. But for the scope of this tutorial, I don't think I'll be doing that. But I already have it installed, and you should also. So you can just go ahead, double click that, and open the Server Management Studio. Take a little bit of time to open. So when we open it, we can then check if our database was created and if we have that expense table that we want to have in our application. So I'm still waiting for it to open. Okay, it's opening. So Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, it's open on my other screen, so let me just drag it up here. Okay, so first thing we need to do is click connect to connect to the SSMS. So let me drag it from my other window. So this is what you're going to have. This is specific to me, but you also have something like this with your computer name. Then you have here databases, so we can click to expand databases. Then I have all these databases that I've created. So I just have to carefully look for a specific one I want, which as you remember from when we registered over here, we named not when we registered, sorry. So if you go to app settings.json, when we created the connection string, we named our database Blazor Expense Tracker. So if you go back to the management studio, we'll look here, we have Blazor Expense Tracker right here. Okay, Blazor Expense Tracker. I also have Blazor Expense Tracker DB, which is another project which I did earlier, but this is a Blazor Expense Tracker. This is the actual database we created, so we can expand that too. Then we can also expand the tables and have a look. Over here we have DBO expenses, so this is one of the tables here, expenses, which corresponds to the model we created right here, which is expense model. Okay, so let's go back there, and we can also right click on this and say script table as, then we say select to, then we create a new query window. So script table as, select to, and the new query editor window, because we want to see the data in that specific table and see if the C data we added is in our database. Okay, so when this SQL statement appears, you can click on execute, and then there it is, data that we added, our seed data that we added. So we can go ahead and minimize this and then move on to next thing. The next thing we're going to do is actually update our expense model, because we need to add a few more things to it so that when we create our front end, we can actually display the expenses in a better way. So the first thing we need to do is to add a title and a description. You can go ahead and just copy them from my notes. So we'll add these two properties. Let me paste them here. So the first property is title and then description. So for every expense that the user is going to add, they're going to have to type a title. So maybe I bought a basketball, so that'll be the title. Then maybe a description, I bought a basketball for my son from so and so place. So we can add that. Now if you are not familiar with this string.empty, it's just a default value for this. We just create an empty string and attaches it to this so that we don't have any warnings. So we add a title and then a description, and finally you notice that from here, let me open this up, we had sort of a warning over here saying no store type was specified for decimal property amount. Okay, so we are going to have to specify the store type on top of, using an attribute on top of our decimal over here. So we'll put some square brackets and add a column. We say type name, equal decimal (18, 4). Okay, nice and beautiful. So that should be able to remove this warning over here. We can go ahead and save. So since we've updated our expense model, we'll need to create a new migration and then update our database again. So we enter the add migrations command, but the name we are going to be using is add precision okay, now let's make it add data. Okay, add new properties to expense model. Add new properties to expense model. Click enter to create the migration. Take a little while. Okay, so that was great. Now we don't see that particular warning, but it just gives us a warning that an operation was scaffolded that may result in loss of data migration for accuracy. Okay, so we don't see this. If I scroll up, this warning that's talking about a specified decimal property amount. Okay, so that means our migration worked great. And we can have a look at this migration file, and we can see that the two properties have been added as columns. So it says model migration builder add column, and the name is title in table expenses, and then we also have one for description over here. So that's great. The next thing we need to do is update the database. So just type update dash database, click enter, and that will also go and update our database. So you can check that by opening. Yes, I think that also has done everything without any errors or even warnings. So we can go ahead and open SQL Server Management Studio. We still have this SQL command here, which is selecting all the columns in our table, which is the expenses table, which has our C data. Now that we've added new columns, let's re-execute this thing again. So you can click execute again. Okay, so if we click execute, we don't see the new table columns. So what we need to do first is to refresh this. Okay, and yes, it's still refreshing. So let's wait a while for it to refresh. And after it's done refreshing, we can then click execute and then make sure that our new table columns appear. It may take a little while. Okay, so it's done refreshing because we see that this is no more grayed out and we can actually click execute. Okay, still sometimes you have to sort of close everything and refresh, open it back up before it works. Blazor expense tracker, tables. Okay, so I know the problem. From this our SQL statement, we are not calling for the other table. So okay, let's just, for simplicity, let's just close that. Do like we did earlier, right click over here, go to script table as, then select to, and then new query. So realize that the new query will actually have the extra table columns. So we have description and title. If we execute, we should be able to see those two columns, but we don't have any data in those two columns. So what we could do is go back to our seed data and add some data in those two. Add some data in those two columns. Okay, so for our C data, it's in our data context. So open our data context. Then let's just add title and description over here. So I'm just copying and pasting this here. It says bought a snake. And description is bought a snack, sorry. Okay, bought a snack, and we don't put anything in the description, just an empty string. Then we can also have, for the next one, we add bought a phone. Place it right here. Also description empty. Then we can also have bought lunch. Then we can also put that here. Okay, we can go ahead and save that. Since we've changed our C data, we need to add another migration. We're going to call the migration add title and description to C data. Add title and description to seed data. Click enter, let that build. When it's done, we can type update database. Click enter for that too. That should update our database, so that when we come and open our SQL Server Management Studio and click execute, we should have the data show up here. Okay, we didn't add any descriptions, but we did add some titles over here. So that's working well. We can minimize that, maybe close some of these windows over here. And the next thing we'll be doing is actually to add a controller. To have our API work, we need a controller that will store all our API endpoints. So what we do is right click on this controllers folder in our server project. So right click on it and we click add, we add controller. On this window, we're going to actually click API, and then we have an API controller that is empty. That's the one we're going to select. And then we click add. Then we're going to name this expenses controller. So let me just do this and have expenses controller. Click add. Then this is our controller. Okay, so first thing we need to do is add a constructor for our controller. So we can type STOR and that controller, we're going to add the data context. I'm going to call it context, and then we can add as create and assign a field context. I can just change this to underscore context, and then underscore context equals to context. So we don't want to use this word, we just want to name it underscore context. So the next thing is we can just go ahead and add the specific request. So using the attributes HTTP GET, okay, we can add the first request, which is public async task action result. I want a list of expense model. Okay, and want to name it get all expenses async. Name of our function, and we don't need any proper anything in our brackets. So we add our curly brackets. I think we don't have a using statement for expense model, so we can go ahead and add that. Just add it here at the top. Okay, so okay, we actually do. So let's clean that. It's already there. Then we need to add the actual code for that. So we first create a variable. We call it response. Okay, and then response is going to be equal to which await underscore context dot expense dot to list async. Okay, so the context that we added over here, underscore context, by just adding dot expenses, it helps us access our expenses a table. Then what we get out of it, we change that into a list and we store that in response. So then we can finally return okay and put response here. We have our semicolon. Okay, control save. Okay, sorry. So I think we actually would need to add the using statement. Let me just use control dot. Okay, so once you use Blazor tracker.shared.models, so you can have a look at that using Blazor expense tracker.shared.models. Okay, so that error is gone. We can go ahead and save. Now, I think after adding this, we can just run our application and check if this API endpoint is showing up in Swagger. So let's run the application. And over at the end here, let's just add the dash Swagger. Click enter. Okay, fine, wonderful. We have our API endpoint here, API slash expenses. Now if you you click to open this, so you just click on this over here. We can try it out to see if we are able to get our data. So click try it out, then click execute. It's loading. Great, so we have a response 200, meaning we're good to go, and we have our 3 different C data that we added into our database. So our API endpoint is working perfectly well. We can go ahead and close this and then quickly add the different endpoints. Now I'm just going to be copy and pasting each of them and explaining, because we have come up at almost a 1 hour point, and I'd love to stop the video here and create a part 2. So let me first copy paste this for the post request, and let's just walk through it. It says public async tax action results expense model, like we did up here. So it's going to return this, and we're going to name it create expense async. And then but this time we need to add the expense, because in our front end we would have a maybe a form that will take the values for the expense. So we need to pass this into this a function to actually add it to our database. So variable response equals await context dot expenses dot add async. This place was to list, but this one I want to add async. Then we'll go ahead and save the changes. Then we return OK by the response dot entity, not just the response, but response dot entity. Because if you have a closer look here, you see that the return type is entity expense model, not just expense model. So we need to actually return response dot entity. Now you can go ahead and add the code for the put or update request. So we have HTTP put, but in this case we need to add a route. So it should be expense model slash expense for our API endpoint, but we need to also add slash ID, because we need to get the ID of the particular expense that we want to edit. Okay, so to do that we need to add route, and then in here we can add quotation marks, and then in the curly brackets, and then ID. Okay, so this will add that extra slash ID for us. And then we can have public async as above, and then also task action results. And we have expense model. We're going to call it edit expense async. So we'll need both the expense itself from the user and also the ID of the expense we want to edit. So the first thing we're going to do is create a value for response. So we're going to call it expense model response, and that's going to be equal to null. Then we'll go ahead and add a variable for db expense. It's going to be equal to await contexts dot expenses dot first or default async. And then we need to add this, which just checks, like it's checking if the ID is equal to the value of ID over here. So we're going to expenses and we want to find the first or default async value. Then we have expense equals, so e equals e dot id. That's the e dot id should be equal to this value ID over here. Then we say that if db expense, which we just try to get, is not null, then we'll go ahead and make sure that each of the fields are edited like this. Okay, so I can copy and paste this right here. So we'll say db expense dot title should be equal to expense dot title, and expense.description should be equal to expense.description. That's an expense over here, what we are putting into the function, and so on and so forth. Okay, and finally we want to await and save changes, context of save changes. Then we want to say response, which you created over here. Response is equal to db expense. Then we want to go ahead and okay, sorry about that. So we only want to do these two things if the expense is not equal to none. Now that means that the expense exists in our database, so we want to await and save the changes, and then response equal to db.context. Now finally we can return okay response. Okay, so that's that for the put request or the edit request. Then we also have to add the final one, which is going to be for delete, similar as we did up there for the put. We also need a route for this one. Okay, so we're going to have route, and it's the same thing, route ID, because we need to know the ID of the specific expense we want to delete. This one is a bit simpler, so we have public async task remove expense, pass ID in, and then we have variable db transaction equal await underscore context dot expenses, just as we did above. We want to find the first or default async. We'll add a little function here, first or default async. You can say e dot id is equal to id. Then we want to check if it is also not equal to null, because if we check and we can't find that particular expense with that id, then we don't do anything. But if we do find it, okay, instead of naming this db transaction, we should name it db expense. Makes more sense. So let's go ahead and change that expense. Sorry about that. Then we can say underscore context dot expenses dot remove. That's the command we use. Then we have db expense, so the expense that's in the database that we've gotten, and we've made sure that it's not null. And a semicolon here, and finally we can go ahead and await underscore context dot save changes async. Okay, with this one we don't need to return anything because we are deleting something. We don't need to return anything. So I can go ahead and save this and then run it, and we check Swagger and see if all our endpoints are showing up and if they are all working well. When the app opens, we can add /swagger. We see that all our endpoints are here. We've tested this out already, but let's go here and try and post or add a new expense. So we won't touch the ID because the ID will be automatically generated, but we can change the title to maybe bought a piano. So I can see the description. It's my birthday, so I bought a piano. Okay, nice. We can see the amount is maybe 1,000, and then created that to also be generated for us. So we can just click execute and wait a bit, and we notice that it works, and we have a 200, meaning that it's successful when we have it added. Now if you want to check if it's actually added, you can check our list, try it out, execute, and see our list of expenses, and we see that it's added at the bottom here, bought a piano. So that's working fine. We can also test our put. So we'll go ahead and add the ID here. So we had 3 items in. The ID normally just follows a numbers, or we can just look. Let's just look here. Okay, so we have the new expense we added, bought a piano, has an ID of 4. So we can just add 4 here in the put. We can put 4 as the ID over here. When we put 4, then we can go ahead and now change whatever we want to change here. So instead of bought a piano, I want to change the title to but maybe let's maintain bought a piano. Okay, but say it's not my birthday. Then maybe let's change the amount to 900. Okay, let's click execute, and then we also have 200 code, meaning that worked. You can scroll up and then re-execute get request for all expenses. So we just click execute, and then we realize that it says bought a piano. It's not my birthday. We changed it, and then the amount to from 1,000 to 900. So our update is also working perfectly well. Now let's go to our delete. Now we want to delete what we created, so we can click try out. Then in ID we enter 4, which is the ID over here for the expense we created. That's ID 4. So we can just add 4 here and we click execute, and 200 means that it worked. We can come back up here and execute and have a look, and we'll see that it's gone. Now we have our original 3 expenses that we added as seed data. So API is working perfectly well, and that makes me happy, and I hope it makes you happy too. So in conclusion, this we'll need to create part 2, so I'll work on that and also post that for you. And in the part 2, we'll try and implement, this works fine, but we'll try and implement some more best practices by first creating services to work for our API, and make to decouple things a bit more and make our project follow best practices. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.